everybody! Welcome to Playbook by Laserforce Loveland. Oh, I'm so loud. I'm just excited to be back. This podcast is a platform for laser tag players to geek out about strategies, stories, and ongoings in the Laserforce scene, and for you to join us as another player at the table. My codename is Mischief. I'm a player from Loveland, Colorado, Loveland Laser Tag, who loves to talk about tag. And tonight I'm joined by a brand new guest, never
Odin's
before been
pissed.
on the podcast before. Hey, it's not your time. This is my you gotta let me introduce you.
Odin's fist.
Just go
Odin's
back.
fist.
Go back.
Odin's
Erase the tape. Erase editors. I don't have editors.
Editors.
Tonight I'm
Editors.
joined by Odin's Fist. Welcome.
Hello.
So we have done the 10 tips on Scout, Medic, Ammo, Heavy Weapons, and next up is Commander. But as we began to develop our 10 tips, we noticed it's pretty easy to make about 50 tips for nuking by itself, which is what we consider one of the core pieces of a Commander's gameplay and role in the game. So before we even do that episode, just to save ourselves a lot of that discussion time, we're doing a whole episode on nuking.
We're going to teach you how to nuke.
Odin, what is a nuke?
Oh, a nuke is so good. That is a great question.
You wouldn't
I
hear
always
that on
like
the news.
talking about the fun of
Nuking is so good, man.
I do always love to talk about the fundamentals of aspects of the game before I delve into advice on it. So, a nuke is when a commander gets 20 special points. They can activate their special ability. You hold down your special button, and you get a voice line.
A special voice
That-
line.
A special voice line that plays over the loudspeaker, that plays for a period of time between 3.9 to 7 seconds, roughly.
Mhm.
And when it finishes, if you have not been deactivated, it deactivates everyone on the enemy team for 8 seconds, removing 3 lives each, and it gives you 500 points. Ooh.
Oh, yeah. The nuke is the most powerful ability in the game. It is such an important component of the game that it gets its own episode. We're never really going to talk about rapid fire as a whole episode. I don't think. We'll see. But yeah,
We could. but do the people want it?
we both have a lot to say. But
Yeah.
first, Odin, what's your experience on Commander? This is a Commander only ability, so have you played it much?
I've played Commander to some extent in several tournaments. I particularly played a lot Commander in Detroit Internationals
Yeah.
in 2019.
You ran that all week, I think, until finals.
Until the very end. Yep. So
Nice. And I've played Commander a few tournaments. It's kind of what I started off as, like most, young testosterone-filled men. I just wanted to attack, and I wanted to be the most powerful player on the field and drop the nukes. So that's what made me feel great. I've played a lot more heavy and scout over the years since, but I played it in 2021 fake internationals in Syracuse. I played it in 2015 internationals. I played it for a lot of 2016. Yeah, it's a big role. And it's so
It is.
just all that to say that there are definitely other people who certainly know much more about Commander and nuking than we do. But we're going to have a discussion about it as two experienced vets, I would say. Aiden, sorry, I just revealed your name on the internet.
no.
Odin, tell us about the fundamentals of nuking.
Yeah, so, going back to, pretty much the general description, when you break down the components of it, right, you have the wait, right, where you have to stay activated for roughly 4 to 7 seconds, depending on the voice line you pull. You need 20 special points to get a nuke, which bases give 5 each, tagging a player gives 1, missile lane gives 2. You can hold a maximum of 99. The nukes deactivate every enemy for 8 seconds. They take 3 lives off of every enemy player, and they give you 500 points. And so we can talk about each part of these components more in depth. Do you have a specific part that you would like to talk about first?
Man, if I would say we should start talking about this for people who are beginners, because I think the way you approach nuking when you are starting out on Commander is going to be a bit different than when you're more advanced.
Mm-hmm.
So like let's see. Do we talk about canceling first of all? I think that's a really important piece of nuking.
Yeah.
Like the hiding piece. So
yeah,
when you're nuking, still coming from a beginner perspective, you have the 4 to 7 seconds roughly time. You hold down the button, and during those seconds before the nuke goes off, if somebody tags you down, your nuke gets canceled. Nothing happens, and you lose all the points you spent to use the nuke. So part of the first thing you do when you nuke is you find a hiding spot, basically. You need to be somewhere safe that you won't get tagged. You hold down the button, and then the nuke is launched, and then you can go back to playing the game. That's kind of the start to finish of a nuke.
Yeah, and I think that this wait time is very interesting and a very dynamic component of the nuke, right? It's not just, oh, every time you get 20 special points, you get this instant super button that works every time. It makes it more something that you have to put more thought into. And kind of one of the big nuances that come from this is around your positioning. And this has a lot of interesting effects. I'll talk some more about later. I have a spiel about how nuking changes based on like your team and the environment. But because you have to stay safe, what it means is that generally you're not positioning yourself in the middle of the entire enemy team when you drop.
No.
And so your positioning overall will change based on what you're trying to get out of the nuke. But generally speaking, the further you are from the enemy team and the closer you are to your own team, and the more secluded you are, the safer you'll be.
Mm-hmm.
There are some other like little tips I have, like nuking when you know that the enemy heavy has been deactivated is a really nice thing to do, even if they haven't actively been pushing into you. If you see the enemy heavy go down and you drop right then, you at least know that the biggest threat has been dealt with, which can make it a much less stressful event.
You know what? I've never once in my life thought about that. Learned all kinds of things from you, Odin. But yeah, man, there's 100 different things we both want to talk about here. So I think we got the fundamentals down. You want to nuke in a safe place, get away from the opponent, get amidst your own team, eliminate risk factors, drop your nuke, make sure the nuke actually goes off. And then the other team, everybody loses 3 lives, and they're all deactivated instantly. And this is when the fun begins.
Yeah. Throughout this, I'm going to be talking a lot about 2 words, tempo and pressure.
I like it.
And these are a little abstract.
Yes.
So I'm going to clarify a little bit. I'll start with an analogy. So if you imagine Space Marines as a big game of tug of war, right? Your pressure would be how far to one side or the other the rope is. It's basically your threat to win or threat to punish the enemy team. And tempo is a lot more about what is actively happening in the game. So tempo is a lot more like the pace at which you're pulling the rope to your side, or the enemy team is pulling it to their side. If you look at the scoreboard in a game, when you see like a wall of green, that would be like a very high tempo for green. Like green would be, they'd be
All
taking a lot
yanking the
more
rope at
control of the
once.
game. Yeah. So you can kind of notice these things in game, especially like pressure when you see a lot of enemy players falling back. Pressure also is a lot easier to notice when you look at your shots and lives, your resources. If you can comfortably go back for resupply after the enemy team, then you're generating more pressure in the meantime on the field. And then tempo is a lot of like taking control of the field and being able to push in and pressure the enemy team and attack. So just kind of a brief going over that, so when I bring them up throughout the video, people have a better understanding of what I mean. So I'm not just using words that make sense to me.
Thank you for explaining that. That's good. Yeah, the opening 10 minutes, the beginner section is over. We're gonna, I mean, this is like,
yeah, deep dive time.
Because nuking is, it's the least isolated ability you can do in the whole game. Every single person in the game is affected by it. So keeping that game-wide perspective of like what is going on with tempo and pressure really informs why you nuke and what you can do with a nuke.
Absolutely. And talking about tempo and pressure, still on the fundamentals a little bit, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is the special points.
Okay.
This system is, in my opinion, the most important part of nuking in terms of macro gameplay. By macro gameplay, I mean the larger strategic sense of the game. Micro gameplay would be things like your positioning and how you trade against enemy players and when you push in on the enemy resupply and things like that. Macro gameplay is when you're thinking minutes ahead and you're trying to play around the structure of the whole 15 minutes of what you have with the game. The generation of special points is directly tied to the momentum and tempo that the commander has in the game. And some examples of this is if you use an offensive nuke while you're low on resources, your next nuke will likely come very slowly because you'll have to recover and resupply, and you're giving up on your pressure and you're giving up tempo in the game. The nice thing about nukes is that they kind of generate pressure and tempo for you, but it needs to be capitalized on, right? But you know, going back to the special points, and they're directly tied to your tempo and your momentum. You by having tempo and moment and pressure, you will gain special points faster, and they generate tempo and pressure for you. And there's some interesting things about this throughout the game, like bases front load your special points to an extreme degree. Actually, they effectively cut the cost of your first nuke in half because 2 bases, 5 special points each, you're getting 10 special points. That means that you acquire your first nuke faster in theory by getting your bases. And some other things to consider is different teams play at different tempos, and understanding the way that your team plays can help you utilize your nukes more effectively. And I'll bring up 2 examples from Nats this year. And you could, if you're listening to this, you can go and watch some of their games from the tournament there. They should be on YouTube under the Laserforce tournaments page. So 2 examples are Brisbane, who had more of a slow start tempo that picked up pace significantly in the mid game, especially after the first nuke or when the enemy commander resupplied. And then the New Zealand A team, who had a very front loaded tempo. They relied on a strong opening pressure as well, but like based on their arena experience and the speed of a first nuke in order to establish their position at the start of the game. They wanted to get set up exactly how they wanted to get set up and then play the rest of the game out from there. And so you had some interesting interactions that happened when these 2 teams met. There would be a lot of games, especially later in the tournament, where New Zealand A would seem to be dominating the game at the start. They would have like a significant lead. It would seem like they had so much pressure, but that was just the pace at which Brisbane was used to playing.
Mm-hmm.
And they just like waited and established themselves. And then based on like their nuke timing and the way that they rotated their 3 hits out, they just took control of the game in the mid game. And this isn't to say that that tempo is better than the other tempo or that it simply wins that way. There's a lot of factors that go on into a game. It's just an example of how teams play at different paces and tempos throughout the game. And so when you know when your team is strong and when you need these nukes, helps a lot. And you can use nukes in a lot of other ways, which I'll get into in a bit, but you can use them defensively. So maybe if you know that your team is a lot stronger in the mid game or in the late game once you're established, but you're just getting wrecked, you could drop early nukes to relieve pressure and do things to help get your team established. But paying attention to the way that your team plays and the way that the tempo in the field is just such a crucial part to nuking at a more advanced level.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are things that you want to start really paying attention to.
Yeah, definitely. I love you bringing up those examples because all the games from that tournament are over on the Laserforce Tournaments YouTube channel. One of the best recorded tournaments that we have, like in quality of the actual stream. So you can go and actually see the really significant areas of the field and watch it all happen. Yeah, you saw a lot of different play styles at play in that tournament, which was really cool to see.
Oh yeah, it was really fun. And like the matches were all such high level matches. Watching those games, there is something to learn from every match that happens. So highly recommend it.
Are you about to go into why you should nuke and the intent?
Yeah.
Well, what do you want to talk about next?
I'll do a quick little spiel about another part of nukes in the components, and then I'll go into
go ahead.
Why you should nuke.
You finish up fundamentals.
So I'll talk about kind of 2 in 1. So they deactivate every enemy for 8 seconds and they remove 3 lives each, right? So there's a lot that you can talk about with deactivating every enemy for 8 seconds, like a lot, but most of it can be summarized very easily by simply saying it stops the enemy team from doing what they want to do for 8 seconds, which is really cool when you think about it, because a lot of times what the enemy team wants to do is something that you really don't want them to be doing. And so that can be things kind of like on the defensive end. Oh, they're turtling. You can stop them from doing that for 8 seconds. Or, oh, they're putting a lot of pressure out. Maybe they're 6-man rushing all of a sudden and trying to flip the field. Whatever it is that their plan is, you can stop it for 8 seconds. And then removing 3 lives each. Primarily what we want to look at with this when talking about highly competitive play is that is a guaranteed 3 lives off of every player, including the people who are hard to get to, particularly the medic and the ammo, but also people with very secure backtrack paths. Maybe there's like a player that's low and they just have like a crazy good spot that they're backtracking repeatedly. And what this means is that it can assist you in pressuring players out of the field or even the game. And pressuring players out of the field is still a significant part. Like even if you don't eliminate them out of the game, just forcing them to go back for a resupply helps. But the most reliable benefit that you will get out of a nuke is taking 3 lives off of the enemy medic every time you use it. It is the best way to push steadily towards an elim. And I think this is a great way to start talking about why to nuke and how to nuke with intent.
All right, let's hear it.
When we talk about why to nuke and how to nuke with intent or purpose, we'll go into kind of like some main objectives with nuking. And these aren't, I don't want people to think of these as like separate times to nuke. We'll talk about that in a second. These are just things that you get out of nuking, right? So we'll start off with maintaining tempo. Dropping nukes helps you maintain tempo. It helps you maintain pressure in the game. And it takes lives off of the enemy medic. And these are going to be our primary objectives. These are always considerations when you're nuking. Nuking controls the tempo of the game and your pressure on the enemy medic. And the only times that you should ignore these conditions are when the trade-off is very substantial, like you're killing out the enemy heavy or something, like you're going to eliminate a player for sure or something like that. Aside from that, these two should always be in the forefront of your mind: maintaining tempo in the game and taking lives off of the enemy medic. Then some other objectives: you have buying time to resupply or recover. You have punishing a player who overextended, stalling enemy resupply, eliminating a player who is life's critical, pausing the game in the midfield, and I have quotations around pausing. It's you aren't actually pausing the game, you're just kind of stalling things out. And fighting your way back into the field after being flushed. Do you have any other objectives that you would like to add?
I think you covered most of mine. As we talk, I'll explain some of my commander philosophy in general. I tend to be someone who goes with the flow of the game when choosing how to nuke. I'm a little more, I want to use the word organic. Organic feels right. Like, so my reason would just be you spot a good opportunity is another reason to nuke. And that could look like 1,000 different things.
Yeah.
But like, these are all really good. Like, this is more like process versus like luck or good decisions. Right. Like, sometimes you, like in general, if you nuke for the reasons that Aiden is telling you to nuke, 95% of the time it's going to be at least a positive choice. It will do something beneficial for your team or you know, contribute significantly to the game. Whereas there are other times that you could basically just drop your nuke at a random time for no reason. Sometimes that could win you the game and do something amazing. Sometimes it'll be one of the least effective nukes ever because it won't meet any of these objectives. It won't give your team something more than what the nuke automatically gives you. And so just when talking, I'm just big on nukes don't have a stagnant value. Like, you have the 3 lives off of everybody, but a nuke can have potentially infinite value. A single nuke could potentially lead to you winning the game if it keeps on giving and creating situations from its original, you know, detonation.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify for people. I'll talk a lot about game theory, and I'll say things like, "This is the better thing to do," or "This is the way that we should play." But I am fully willing to believe that other players have come to better conclusions than me, which is where I love sparking these conversations and being able to think from different perspectives and have different ideas. But also, the game has a million different scenarios to it. Right?
Definitely.
It is infinitely changing. There's so much just based on the 12 shuffleable players in the game. It could be anybody. There's a lot that happens, and so things will need to be adjusted. This is just philosophy to be in the right mindset, I guess. This is to guide you, right? This is all things where these are hopefully reliable points that will allow you to play the game more reliably at a high level.
Yeah. No, totally. Thanks for clarifying that point. But I think there's something to be said about process, because yes, there's infinite ways to play the game and new innovations can come up. But the reason that we're making a huge video about this is because we have seen things that tend to work better than other things. And these are good principles to rely on. Like, you know, let's say you're playing D&D, Aiden, and you're making an attack. And I'm going to hand you 2 dice and you get to roll one of them for your attack roll. One dice has the numbers 5 through 20 on it. The other dice has the numbers 1 through 15 on it. Which dice are you going to pick?
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I'm going to pick the 5 through 20 die.
it's more probable that that dice will give you a good result, but that doesn't mean that the other one can't beat out. Like, you could still potentially make the wrong choice. It's just, we're talking about probabilities. No nuke is ever a guarantee. Yep. You're just always you're nuking because you think something will happen.
Well, and a lot of these are just going to be generally good answers.
Just good advice.
And I try to stick to things that can be applied pretty much always, right? Like, I try to say things where you can bring this knowledge into different fields, you can bring it onto different teams, and it's philosophy that covers a lot of the game and is very flexible. Like I talk about rigid points, but like there's flexibility. Like, if you're trying to use a nuke to maintain tempo, that could be 100 different things, and that's up to your own judgment, right? But I'm just gonna, before I get super deep into each of these points, I'm just gonna talk real quick about some two kind of big mistakes that players make in a very broad sense with regards to their nukes. The first is stacking. And I have a larger talk about stacking and specifically the philosophy behind stacking later. But as a general rule, if you're stacking your nukes and the enemy medic dies before your last nuke goes off, you have prolonged the game and allowed them to remain alive longer than they would have if you dropped your nukes earlier. And I think this is a really big flaw that people don't realize with nuking. Like, this is 100%. If the enemy medic dies before your last nuke, you have wasted time and you've let the enemy team fill up more than they should have.
Can we pause there for a minute?
Big no. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a bunch of reasons not to not nuke, if that makes sense. Because I know people will, one of those reasons is people will hold their nukes because they want to stack 3, because that's just how I roll. I drop 3 at once because I'm trying not to cuss, you know what I mean.
Yeah, like, don't stack.
I'm the freaking boss, so I'm gonna drop 3 on these noobs. But have you ever look at the scoreboard and you see that the enemy medic is at 6 lives and the commander's holding 2 nukes, and then they keep holding those nukes, and the enemy team's getting lives? Like, every nuke you have is a potential -3 lives on everybody on the other team. So if there's ever a point where you could kill somebody out, especially if it's someone who's not the other medic. Now, granted, you can't watch the scoreboard when you're inside the arena, so you don't know.
Yeah.
But that's why, just to go back to the beginner basics.
That's why Luke brings his laptop into the game to watch the scoreboard.
It's part of the Laserforce equipment.
He brings the game computer in. It's standard Laserforce equipment.
Well, what I tell my new players is drop your nukes as soon as you get them. Because 9 times out of 10, dropping the nuke as soon as you get it is better than holding the nuke. I truly believe that. Now, there's good reasons to hold sometimes, but you want to cash in on the value of your nuke as opposed to letting it go to waste or potentially getting it canceled later or dropping it too late when the game is already lost for you.
I am going to talk about that because that's actually my second big mistake that players make. And I'm going to need you to let me cook with this for a second.
Okay, here's a frying pan, here's some eggs.
Big mistake. And this is when we get into the realm of thinking to drop your nuke strategically, right? Is nuking the instant you get one. There's actually a lot of benefit that this gives, and I actually really recommend starting here if you're trying to start playing the game tactically, dropping the instant you get one. The main benefit of this for newer players is that you're more likely to keep a reliable and consistent tempo in the game than if you stall your nukes out waiting for a perfect opportunity that just doesn't come around, or you stack your nukes and don't really get any benefit out of it. But if you're just tucking into a corner and dropping a nuke real quick without giving your team any warning or setting yourself up for a strategic move, then you're just going to lose out on a tremendous amount of value from the nuke, right?
Yes.
at the end of the day, as a commander, you cannot get the most out of your nuke. It is not possible because of, going back to the fundamentals, that 4 to 7 second wait time before it drops.
Mm-hmm.
You have to position yourself in a safe spot. The best spot to be when a nuke drops is inside of the enemy team, especially like right when it drops, right when they're scrambling to get their backtracks out, just right in the middle of the enemy team is a phenomenal place to be, and the commander just cannot get there. So coordinating with your team with your nukes is how you get the most value out of them. Now there are times when like you just see like your scout is already running into the enemy team. They're already like positioned right there. Your heavy's filled up, you're like, okay, I can afford to drop right now. But just dropping the instant you get your nukes is not how you're going to be getting the most value out of them. Now, like I said, if you're starting to try to think about the game more strategically, this is a consistent and reliable way to drop, better than stacking for sure. But when you're starting to think more tactically about your nukes and the team play component of it,
mm-hmm.
This is something that you just shouldn't be doing. You should be coordinating with your team. You should be looking for opportunities. You should be playing around the nukes a lot more. It's great for when you're trying to learn the role overall. You can drop your nukes, be consistent, just be a commander. But as far as tactically using your nukes, you're losing out on a lot of value like this. That's my spiel.
That's a delicious meal you just cooked up. Delicious advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome.
What we're talking about, like, and I'm gonna keep saying we will talk about it. I'm just gonna talk about it. Nukes bring so much potential for your team to capitalize upon. So what you want with a nuke, when you're thinking overall in a macro sense of how to make, like, when should I drop my nuke? You want the most bang for your buck is the answer, whatever that looks like. And that can look like you drop at the perfect moment to let your team refill when, if you don't do it, someone's going to die out of the game. Like that, the difference between not dropping and dropping, massive in that instance. Or dropping at a time when your team is all ready to charge in and they end up getting 20 additional resets on the enemy team before they arrive at a new safe location, versus you not nuking or nuking later when nobody gets a reset on them. Tremendous value. So we were looking for those instances, but nuking without all that bang for your buck is better than not nuking in general. Because if I were to just nuke at a random time, likely someone's going to get some resets on somebody, or someone's going to take advantage of it and get a double or run in. Like, you provide a situation for the other 5 members of your team, a situation where no one on the other team can tag them for 8 seconds. It's a pretty good deal. Usually they can take advantage of that. So like just dropping them when you're new and you don't know exactly why to nuke, getting them out early creates momentum for your team, helps your team take more territory, creates more positive outcomes later. It can really snowball. What I've seen so many players do is they're trying to stack, but their team is losing. And they're like the other team is nuking. Your own team's getting pushed into corners and not able to resupply, and they desperately could use a nuke, but you're trying to stack, and as a result, you might get a high score, but the rest of your team had to play with a really big disadvantage.
Yeah, and something that people should understand, and I'm about to like full send my how to nuke with intent spiel, but
go.
You need to understand that your nukes are crucial to the game,
yes,
but aren't a last resort.
They're not.
Do not be afraid to use them.
It's a core feature of the game and your team. Your team needs your nukes.
Yep. And something that people should think about more is that dropping your nukes opportunistically will help you get your next nuke.
Yes.
By creating pressure in the game, you're setting yourself up to get your next nuke. And I'll kind of skip forward a little bit for a second here to give a good example of that is so many times players will be like, oh, I'm close to 2 nukes, I'll just wait for 2. But if you just drop your nuke and make good plays off of that first nuke, you just set it up well, you'll just get your next nuke so fast, and then you can drop that and make plays off of it.
No one thinks about this, but or not everyone, but dropping a nuke one and then waiting a second and then dropping the next one, sometimes that's better than dropping 2 at once.
Almost always, actually. I have a big block about that, but I'm gonna tell people how to nuke with intent real quick overall. So the biggest thing is you want to pay attention to the state of the game, right? Whenever you aren't shooting players, talk to your team. When you go back for resupply, ask your medic how many lives they're at. See where people are at, right? If you know that your scouts are healthy, they don't need to go back for resupply. Okay, cool. That means that you have 2 players that can get value off of your nuke. They're ready to go. Know what your heavy's at. If a scout is having trouble doing anything, if they're like, oh, I am just getting pushed out of here, I can't get through here at all, that's valuable information. Like, as much information as you can get out of the game as possible. Just learn everything about the situation. Pay attention to things. Talk to people. If you're playing at like a Nats or something where your team is consistently talking and like you're trying to play strategically, and your ammo and medic have watched our ammo and medic videos, talk to your ammo, get the deets. Talk to your medic, get the deets. But just paying attention to the state of the game is so important. And most importantly, watch the enemy 3 hits. One of the best pieces of information for a commander is the state of the enemy 3 hits, where their resources are at. When the enemy commander goes back for resupply, all of a sudden you have priority in the game. When they come back out into the field, they are going to start gaining tempo. They are now full of stuff. They have a lot of staying power, and they can create a lot more pressure. This is where their team starts to gain control of the game. And if both enemy 3 hits are full, you're probably about to lose control of the field. So that's something, just watch the enemy 3 hits, pay attention. You'll learn a lot about the state of the game through them. The other thing is to allow your team to utilize your offensive nukes. Selfish play style where you just nuke at times that allow you to push is the least effective use of them. We talked earlier about you can't be in the best spot for a nuke as the commander. You just cannot. And at the same time, you're only accomplishing one objective with that, right? Which is, probably taking lives off of the enemy medic. You're dropping and then pushing in. But if you allow your team to position themselves for nukes, you can drop in a spot that gives you more value. Still get pressure and medic lives off of the nuke drop and control the tempo of the game much better. This allows you to do things like get resupply, reposition yourself, take control of key locations in the field, etc., while your team is pressuring the enemy resupply. Your resources are limited and precious, and it's very important to let scouts handle any of the tasks that you can let a scout handle. Ugh.
One of the coolest things I've heard this past year was doing just a conversation with now world champion commander Slaughtermelon. That feels really good to say. He's grown so much. He said, commander, I've realized, is the most selfless role in the game. People tend to think the medic needs to be the most selfless and the commander's kind of the most selfish. Like, I need to get my points, I need my nukes, I need to, I'm the first resupply priority, blah, blah, blah. But the way that he began thinking about the game from a teamwork perspective, and it's really hard to argue with a guy that was able to win Nats doing this. Like, the team play of that team, with the commander being willing to come back for resupply in sync with his team, drop nukes in situations where his team was ready to attack and follow up on them. It's a little different, but from a teamwork perspective, it was the most effective for the team. And he didn't end up with the MVP commander stats, He wasn't putting up the 13K scores most of the time. people tend to think of like you start off playing SM5 and you see those big scores and you see how the commander's always on top. And I've definitely seen people develop a bit of an ego with it, thinking that's what a good commander
Yeah,
is. They carry the team. Not true at
definitely.
all. Your nukes are there to serve your team.
Yeah. Just objectively speaking, it's the best way to use them. Um, so that's just kind of like an approach to the game, right? This is how you should be changing your mindset if you want to nuke with intent and get the most value out of them. I talked a bit about each of the main objectives before, so I'll talk kind of individually about them, about when they each come into play, and you will oftentimes be combining these. You'll be getting significant value out of your nukes. You're going to be achieving each of these objectives, or not each of them, but a lot of them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So starting off with the core objectives that we talked about. And so this is just when each objective comes into play, really. But starting with the core objectives: maintaining tempo and taking lives off of the medic.
Okay.
These are your core objectives. These objectives come into play always. There's not really a lot more situational stuff I'm going to talk about with these. It's just these are your main focus. And if you're ever not getting these, it's because you're making a trade-off. Now, buying time to resupply. That was one of the objectives. You can nuke for this anytime you need resupply, really. But while the enemy team has 3-hit pressure, that's the main thing. The enemy 3 hits are out in the field doing stuff, and you need to resupply. This can be combined easily with the core objectives by coordinating with your team, so long as they have the resources to operate. You can go back to your resupply, say to your heavy, are you good to push? And if they say yes, say, okay, I'm going to drop, you push, I need to fill up. You drop, your heavy pushes, you resupply. Your team is doing work, you're getting an opportunity to resupply, you're taking control of the field.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Classic bread and butter strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. You can also nuke for this when your team is on the back foot after being flushed away from the primary resupply spot. So you guys are now respawning in an awkward spot. You guys are trying to recover. You can drop this to kind of relieve some pressure, let your team get set up, get some resupply going. One of my favorite ways to buy time to resupply with a nuke, actually, is when I know that the enemy commander is trying to nuke. You just, when you play enough games, you know, but you can also, maybe you hear the little sound bite or whatever, but you know, you see the enemy commander scurrying away all of a sudden when you know they got lives and shots. You're like, oh, he's trying to nuke. And you know that the enemy commander is trying to nuke, and you want to give your team a chance to resupply first, so you can drop preemptively. It gives you a much better chance of surviving the nuke push and being able to last in the field longer in order to recover, regroup, without being punished and potentially have players be forced out of the game. Dropping a nuke like this is also the most likely way to get a nuke on nuke cancel, though that outcome is definitely not something that you're going to rely on. It will happen occasionally and can completely turn the tide of the game. And the most likely situation where that occurs is when you're doing this defensive nuke in preparation of a nuke.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sometimes you just feel it in the air. It's like, man, it would be really bad if they nuked right now. Oh, man, maybe they're about to do it.
Yeah. If you have a nuke and you're ever like, oh, a nuke would devastate our team right now if the enemy team dropped it, just drop your nuke. You're you're stopping the enemy from doing what they want to do for 8 seconds. And even if they weren't going to nuke, you're still just buying your team 8 seconds to recover from what was probably a pretty bad spot.
And I mean, you don't want to live in the zone where a nuke would devastate you anyway. You want to be out of that as quick as possible, just in case.
Yeah. So the next objective I'll talk about is punishing a player who overextended.
Yeah.
This one is one of the ones where it's more simply dropped as soon as possible. Once you realize that an enemy player, preferably a 3-hit, is desperately low on shots or lives and is running back to their resupply, you know that, like, oh, I just heard the enemy commander's pack say 7 lives available. They're struggling. You can drop your nuke. kind of a misunderstanding, I think, is that, oh, you only drop a nuke like that if you're going to eliminate a player out of the game. But I don't really think that's necessary. Um, Even just by punishing a player who stayed in the field longer than they should, you can really put the hurt on them. Even if you don't eliminate them out of the game, putting a 3-hit on like low single digit lives effectively removes them from the game for a while.
Yes.
Like a 3-hit is going to be in their resupply. Most players are going to be in their resupply, tucked behind the medic, even with their gun down. Like, please give me lives. I need lives.
Yep.
And they'll probably be there for a few rounds of it, realistically. You're pretty much saying, okay, the enemy team is going to be without a 3-hit at all for a period of time now. Like, they're not going to be defending, especially like the enemy heavy pushes out and they get low and you nuke. Now you can put like the beat down on them.
Right.
And when you get more experience in game sense through practice, you can often tell some of these windows by a player's positioning and movements. Like you see a heavy, very like stubbornly pushing in your resupply over and over, and all of a sudden they're blitzing across the field trying to be as safe as possible. They're like not taking any opportunistic shots or anything. They're not trying to trade. You're like, oh yeah,
they
are lives. Suffering.
They got 4.
Yeah, and I mean, when a commander returns to resupply with 2 lives and a handful of shots, they're not defending. Especially like you mentioned earlier about how a lot of commanders get into kind of a selfish mindset where, I'm the priority for resupply and stuff. That's very true. They are focusing on staying alive and getting resupplied. And chances are, if they're going back on low lives, low shots, like really like scarily low resources, they'll probably stay and get fuller than they would have otherwise. It's a lot easier when you're like coming back at a comfortable time to get a couple rounds of resupply and push back out. But when they're that low, a lot of commanders will want to even fill up all the way. They'll want to get a lot of resupply. And this lets you take control of the field and dominate key zones in the arena and stuff. And that leads to you taking better trades, getting more effective use of your resources, more effective use of your shots and lives. This allows you to really take a lot of tempo in the game. And you can take a lot, you'll find a lot more opportunities off of this. So this is a really good punishing players who overextended. May seem like kind of a weird little niche thing, but this is like actually a significant thing to keep in mind.
It's a real domino effect if you do it right. Yeah, that's well said.
And usually, even if the enemy commander nukes after you drop one in this way, they're just doing so to buy time. It's going to be a back off nuke. And if they wait to nuke until they're able to go out into the field, you've taken such control of the field that if you're playing properly, your team should be more than ready to handle a nuke. You guys should be ready to take it head on and not even be pushed out of the field. The next objective is going to be stalling enemy resupply. And this is kind of like a tricky, kind of quirky one. And in most cases, it's best to just set up a strong offensive nuke push with your team. However, there are times when you see that the enemy team is trying to fill up both of their 3-hits at once. Usually this happens when the heavy was not properly filling up while defending. And so when their commander comes back for resupply, the heavy is not healthy. When this happens, if your heavy isn't ready to push right away, it can be better to drop a nuke just to stall the enemy resupply. How I talked before about how you're basically stopping the enemy team from doing what they want for 8 seconds. That applies here too. They want to fill both their 3-hits up. They need them to get resupply so they can defend. They can't defend right now. Dropping a nuke, now their heavy needs an extra round of lives to be at the same level. And B, you're stopping them from resupplying for 8 seconds. And this can be enough for your heavy to get an extra double and push out and punish them for filling both their 3s at the same time. There are times too where you can even just punish this as a commander in various situations. So like maybe the enemy team was flushed. They have a bunch of backtracks. They need to fill their 3 hits, and you know that it's going to take you time to get to where they're going by going another route. An example using the Loveland Arena would be, say you flush them down the green ramp, and they're going down the green ramp, but you can't just chase after them. You have to go around and go down the red ramp and catch up with them. You know it's going to take a while. You can drop a nuke to stall that out when you know that they're going to be recovering, to buy you that time to push down the other ramp. You're essentially keeping the enemy 3 hits low enough for you to mount and attack while they're still in a state of desperation. That's kind of the main thing, because that is the best time to be attacking the enemy resupplies, when they are, we need to fill both of our 3 hits up. They're not doing well. Do you have anything to say about that before I jump onto the next objective?
You're saying a lot of really good stuff. I imagine a lot of players, when they're starting out, don't really think about how their commander play or their nukes will impact the tempo of the game or create these domino effects, is the word I just like to keep using here. Players who are full on resupplies, who are midway on resupplies, low crit, they all behave differently. And the way that the enemy team behaves changes the options you have and what your best moves are. You know, like we said, it's kind of a game of tug of war. It's a game where I think of it like arm wrestling too. Like if you are arm wrestling someone and you're both straight up 90 degrees, you both have the same amount of leverage. But if I can move your arm down a little bit, I'm in a more comfortable spot. I have gravity on my side. I have better leverage. I'm more likely to win just by getting my arm pushed a little farther and making you pulled backwards. You know what I mean? That's what this reminds me of. If you can get the enemy team on the back foot with your nuke, the next minute or two of the game, if the enemy team doesn't respond with a counter nuke or find a way to get back to 50-50, you're more likely to keep pressing your advantage throughout the game, even without your nukes. Because you're just going to control more of the field. You're going to have more resupplies, more resources, more stuff. It's a win. So punishing people for overextending, forcing them out of the game, puts the other, makes it a 6v5 for a little bit. And who knows what your team can do with that.
Now, I'm going to get to probably a lot of people's favorite objective.
Ooh.
Eliminating a player who is lives critical.
Yeah.
Now, this one is pretty straightforward, but I believe that it's generally misunderstood to a degree. So this is a situation where, you know, an enemy player is lives critical, so you drop in order to eliminate them. The main issue with the strategy is that a lot of players stack 3 nukes hoping to pull this play off when the time arrives. I don't believe in planning your entire game around hoping that an enemy player will make a mistake when you need them to.
Nope.
That's just not how I like to play. I think that it's not a winning strategy. I think that you'll get some games where it works out, but it's not enough to pull out in a tournament. The second issue is with how players use this strategy is that they expect the nukes to eliminate the player. In reality, your nukes in this situation are just a tool to help you eliminate the player prematurely. You're turning their entire team off for 8 seconds, which means no resupply. On top of that, you're removing 3 lives per nuke from them. But the single biggest benefit here is being able to punish and reset the player without them receiving any assistance from their team or any resupply. If you hear a player's pack say that they have 7 lives remaining and you drop a nuke as they're running back for resupply, imagine if they got shot down on the way back. They got shot down as you're nuking. 6 lives. Now your nuke drops. 3 lives. You had a scout push in on the nuke. Maybe they flushed the resupply even.
Oh, yeah.
Now that player can't get filled up. They have nowhere safe to go. They get reset again by the scout. 2 lives. Now all it takes is 1 missile or 2 more lives taken in any way, for them to get killed out of the game early. Maybe they came back in hoping that their resupply was there. Their resupply got flushed. They got reset. Now they have to flush with their team. They're getting a reset off of their team running away. And, you went to go down the other way to push their resupply that's getting flushed. Bam. All of a sudden they're dead. One nuke, 7 lives, like that. I know there was a lot going on there, but that's just because there's a lot going on in the game. This is actually not that complicated of a situation. This is not some rare, like a bunch of things happen to line up. Your nuke could take 7 lives off of a player. It's not a guaranteed thing, but like I said with the punishing players who overextend thing, like even if you don't eliminate a player, you can still be effectively taking them out of the game for a while.
Mhm.
There's not a ton of risk with this objective, other than the standard risks that come with nuking. But like I don't know, I said a lot of stuff, but with every nuke, the most crucial component of every nuke are these follow-ups. They are the situations that they enable.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I just think those are like kind of like the two main issues. Is stacking, hoping that you'll be able to eliminate a player when the time comes, I think is not the right way. You shouldn't be stacking 3 nukes hoping that someone ends up on 7 lives, right? You see that someone's on 7 lives. You see that you have a nuke and you say, okay, I'll just drop this now. I'll punish them.
Right.
Maybe you have 2 nukes, which is like pretty much just a done deal at that point. But don't stack hoping that things happen. This is more an opportunistic situation where you see that somebody is crit on lives, and so you drop in order to punish it. And basically you're enabling a scenario where that player could be eliminated out of the game is the main goal here.
Yeah. Are you ready to start talking about stacking, or do you got more to say on like the reasons?
I got 2 more things here.
Yeah, let's finish them up.
I have pausing the game. I'll keep saying all throughout this discussion that tempo is a key part of nuking. And one of the ways that your team maintains tempo is through 3-hit rotations. When the commander goes back for a resupply, you as a commander are losing all tempo in the field. This is why heavy swapping out to pressure the enemy team is a very crucial thing. And one thing that you can accomplish with a nuke is effectively stalling the game in the midfield. Without you or your heavy forward, it's difficult to pressure off of a nuke. And most likely players in the midfield will simply make some backtracks. It might seem like a useless nuke, but it can actually benefit your team a lot if you have the upper hand in a game. If you're the game is kind of going in your favor, you're maintaining pressure pretty well, and you just want to keep your advantage. The trick to this one is understanding the flow of the game. So like if we're going back to the tug of war analogy, imagine your heavy is like on the bench and you have to tag your heavy out so you can drink some water because you're playing tug of war for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
If you just let go of the rope and go tag your heavy in to drink water, all of a sudden your team is fighting for their lives. They're all of a sudden down a person in this game of tug of war, and the enemy team is tugging away. If you can just pause the game while you go swap out with your heavy, all of a sudden you're not losing that momentum. All of a sudden your team isn't feeling that pressure, and your heavy isn't going out into a situation where you're already actively losing control of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So this lets you like gain some ground, give your team an advantage, give them some breathing room during that transition period, and buy some time for you to even get a resupply or 2. And there's other things you can do with this for pausing the game where like right as the enemy team is starting to come back and take tempo, right? We talked about tempo in relation to resupply. The enemy commander just filled out. They're starting to gain some presence in the game. You can basically pause the game, swap out with your heavy, stall the enemy team's tempo, stall them from getting back into the game. And this allows you to maintain your lead, maintain your pressure, maintain your advantage. And so it's a little like lackluster. It's not like the shining star of nukes, right? It's not, oh, we're eliminating the enemy ammo early all of a sudden off of a crazy nuke. But it is something to keep in mind where like this is a benefit that you can get out of nuking.
Yeah, definitely.
The other objective.
Can I add to that one? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes, especially like in tournament play, when you are witnessing teams over and over and kind of seeing how they play games out, if you know that certain teams tend to ramp up to like a strong mid game, or you're anticipating certain moves from the opponent, or you like you foresee that your team is about to get at a disadvantage, those are fine times to use a pause.
Yeah.
Like it can just, I don't know, it can kind of give your team a boost and maybe even throw the enemy off
Yeah.
because they might choose to delay whatever they were about to do because of your nuke, even if they don't actually have to. Nukes have a weird psychological effect. They freak people out.
Oh yeah. They put a lot of people in the defensive, even if they're like primed to go on the offensive.
Yeah.
I've particularly seen a lot of games at tournaments where a team has like rallied up, they filled up, they're about to go on a double 3-hit push, and both their 3 hits are going out, and all of a sudden a nuke drops in. At that point, all you can really do is just kind of shrug.
They should wait. They should just like, okay, so we have to wait 8 seconds. Let's use this downtime to get an even better position to attack. But just the idea of some of the other team nuking, sometimes you picture the worst case scenario and everybody scrambles to go back to the defensive.
Yeah. So moving on real quick to the last objective.
Yeah.
Recovering from a flush. This is, in my opinion, one of the most important and straightforward yet rarely used nuking strategies.
Yep.
Almost every arena has a couple of very strong ideal resupply locations. A lot of times your team will want to set up in a particular spot, and a lot of time your team is going to get pushed out of that spot at some point in the game. The purpose of this nuke is to allow your team to push back up into position and reclaim lost ground. The reason you want to utilize this nuke is because the enemy team will have already taken advantageous positions to try and stop your team from fighting their way back up without anything short of like some crazy, well-synchronized plays. By sending your team up and dropping a nuke, even if they get deactivated, even if they get shot down, even if they have to fight their way up, they can take up positions that they want, and because they will come on before the enemy team will, they can effectively kick them out. They can just give them the boot for sure, reclaim the spot that they want to be in. The most important part of this nuking strategy, it's an important part of every nuking strategy, but specifically for this one, it is required. Effective communication with your team. If you get a nuke and you're like, oh, this is perfect, I can drop a nuke and my team can push back up, and you're just hoping that they'll do that, you could be dropping a nuke and then they're like, oh, maybe we could go up on this. They get a couple resupplies in and they start running. Maybe they're running up. They have to run up a ramp to get where they need to go. And the enemy team upstairs is just like, oh, we got nuked. Okay. And then they come on, and then your team is not where they need to be. You have to communicate. Your team cannot be arriving after the nuke goes off. The enemy team is probably going to make backtracks off of the nuke. And if they're backtracking the way that your team is coming up, it is going to mess with your plans. So communicate with your team. Always.
Yes. Great advice. Agreed. Concurred.
All right. Do you have anything else to say?
That's all I got on that.
Nuking objectives. Because I am ready to start talking about stacking if you are.
Let's talk about stacking. At the very end, I want to talk a little about kind of the opportunistic approach, because one of the my big reason I said is you spot an opportunity. I think a lot of the reasons that you choose to stack versus not stacking versus doing a nuke for any of those reasons is purely based on the scenario you find yourself in.
Yep.
And would love to touch on that later. But yeah, let's talk about stacking versus not stacking.
Yeah. So stacking, the philosophy behind it. Time and time again, you'll hear people say that you shouldn't stack your nukes, and I agree. However, that's in an ideal game. Like everything is going like textbook, like the way you expect. You're just strategizing with your team and you're just playing the game. And I like to focus all my energy on like kind of like the ideal way to play the game and like how to form goals that we should strive for as players and like objectives. But we're all human. The game is very chaotic. Mistakes are made often, and having to react to these mistakes and having to be a reactive player is a burden that is most heavily placed on the commander. You have to adjust what you're doing to the situation constantly. And in some circumstances, that just means that you're stacking nukes. So I'm going to kind of address like different numbers of nuke stacks and what they can accomplish and how to deploy them and how you get there.
Fire away.
Starting off with 2. That 2 is a very common stack. You typically either get here because A, you went back for a resupply just shy of a nuke, and the time that you would like to stay out in the field brought you to a second nuke, and there was no situation that really forced you to drop before them. Or B, you have now overextended yourself because you got close to a second nuke and you were like, well, I'll just get a second nuke. And now you're low on resources, which is like a very important part of this. And this is assuming that you're just getting to a 2 stack. This isn't, oh, I'm planning on stacking 3 or 4. This is
you're trying to drop 2.
You're dropping 2, basically. Now, ideally, you don't want to end up in a position where you have to launch 2 nukes. 6 lives usually isn't enough to really eliminate players out of the game, especially if they're resupplying properly or they're able to get a resupply before your nuke goes off. And it's also just enough time for the enemy to form backtracks pretty thoroughly and not be very punished off of the second nuke. So you basically end up with the second nuke being dead with no development off of it. Now, obviously, you're still taking 3 lives off. You're still getting the 500 points. You're still creating 8 seconds of pressure. But there are some effective ways to utilize 2 nukes, though. First and foremost, I'd like to say again, if you're really close to your second nuke, just drop 1. Like, I don't care if you're at 35 special points, just drop your nuke. You'll provide pressure, you'll gain priority in the field, you'll take some tempo, and you should be able to finish grabbing that second nuke pretty quickly, which now you have a nuke that you can kind of use more tactically and kind of take your time with. But if you have 2 nukes already and you just need to launch them, my suggestion is to stagger drop. My preferred way to do this is to get to the resupply, get a double and send the heavy out and say, hey, I'm going to stagger drop, or I'm going to drop 2 nukes staggered, just so that they know to keep the pressure up. And once they're out attacking, you drop the first nuke. Once that's dropped, you get a resupply or 2, and then you drop the next nuke. What this does is it gives your team an extended window to pressure the enemy team. So instead of 16 seconds, now you have this whole window of time, and keep them locked in an awkward position at the least. The best case scenario is that it lets your team flush the enemy 2 separate times to really put them on the back foot. You flush them out of the main resupply spot, they recover at their fallback spot, and they're like, okay, this is fine, we can recover. And then all of a sudden a second nuke drops off, your heavy's in there, and they're like, oh no. The best case, and so like after the second nuke, probably what you want to do is just get a resupply immediately and immediately start pushing out to help pressure. You can maybe swap back with your heavy if your heavy needs to get more resupply. But like this method of nuking is almost guaranteed to not eliminate a player. Technically, dropping both still has a chance to eliminate somebody, but when you're looking at the nuking objectives, right? Like when you're dropping here, eliminating a player is not your objective. You're not like this is if you didn't get an opportunity where you're like, oh, there's a player crit, I'm going to nuke out of the game. So if it's not your objective, you shouldn't play hoping that that's something that occurs, right? You shouldn't be prioritizing play without information that makes it kind of a done deal, right? So you're just gambling with that, and it won't pay off 8 times out of 10. So your priorities, right? Always maintaining tempo and taking lives off the enemy medic. With a staggered drop, you are greatly enlarging the window of time in which your team has full control of the arena. So you're getting way more tempo and pressure out of it. And you're giving your team 2 separate opportunities to attack the enemy medic off of a nuke. So you're really hitting those 2 main objectives a lot harder than if you just drop your nukes back to back.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're right that for the most part you won't eliminate someone, but just like you talked about earlier with dropping 1 nuke on someone who has 7 lives, you can look at a double drop as though it's just a greater, it expands the range of lives that someone has to have before they're safe from being potentially eliminated. That's one of the main benefits of dropping 2 back to back without any staggering. It's kind of like just it's a steeper drop off with more downtime that the enemy team will, when they are reactivated, they're going to have to recover from that differently than if they only had 1. But I agree with you on the whole. I think stagger dropping provides a lot better opportunities for your team to maintain control. My issue with stagger dropping is just that idea that the commander really can't be in the middle of the action when they drop the nuke. So if you're going to stagger drop, that means you drop, and then there's sort of like a lull where you're not near the enemy team, and then you have to get back away from the enemy team to drop again. So if you're going to do it, I think it's best to do it in your resupply.
Yeah.
Because momentum is really important. I would say go to your resupply, you send out the heavy, you drop your first nuke, get a resupply. That gives you 8 whole seconds. You can get a second resupply if you want, but whether 1 or 2, then drop again. And that way you're making use of that downtime with something that's really important.
Yeah. And then that allows you to follow up off of the second nuke pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you aren't directly attacking the enemy, you can take like key spots to control the field. Very good. Very good stuff. And you can stay out longer to keep the pressure up more.
Mm-hmm.
3 nukes.
3 nukes.
This is a nuke stack with intent. You got here on purpose. You wanted to stack your nukes.
You son of a gun.
You should not have 3 nukes stacked up unless you have a specific goal or reason to hold off on nuking. Now, once you get into the 3 and 4 stacks, they become a lot more one-dimensional, right? Even based on the arena, there's very little difference to how they play out from a macro play perspective. Basically, once you reach 3 nukes, you should drop once the enemy medic is low enough to be eliminated. It's as simple as that. If the enemy medic dies before your last nuke goes off, like I've said, you've just given the enemy team extra lives. You've given them more pressure in the field. There's no positive trade-off to dropping nukes after the medic is dead. When the medic dies as part of the chain, the enemy team doesn't get more resupply anyways. They aren't recovering any of those lives back anyways. So,
yep.
With a 3 or 4 chain, there's a reasonable chance of catching players out, but you're primarily eliminating the enemy medic and simultaneously putting several players on the back foot with too few lives to make a proper stand.
Mm-hmm.
So catching a medic out at 9 lives, you're going to be getting a lot more lives off of the surviving players than if the medic's on 1 and they're like, I'm on 1, I have to fill everyone up, and everyone gets full. So that's really like the main benefit that you're getting with 3 chain. Ideally, if you're able to eliminate the enemy medic with the 3 chain, you'll be able to get another nuke that you can use, which you can use to help eliminate like players that are hard to deal with, particularly players who like to just run around the field like lunatics and hide everywhere and be a menace to society. And also you can use that nuke to break any organized defense that the enemy team puts together to stall the game. Like, oh, you have the team on the back foot, their medic's dead, all of a sudden they're turtling you. Get a nuke.
Yep, you definitely want a nuke for that.
However, with typical game pacing at a competitive level of play, you won't be taking 11 lives off of the medic before you get to your 3rd nuke. without utilizing nukes in the meantime, right? Like
Right,
you'll
right.
probably
Mhm.
do that when you play standard and you're dropping your nukes and pressuring and getting lives off of each nuke. But if
Mhm.
you're stacking, you probably aren't just taking 11 lives off of the medic in a high competitive level. Um, the other reason to drop a 3 chain is if you were planning to 4 chain and your team just isn't able to hold out with the lack of pressure. Because remember, nukes control the tempo and the pressure of the game.
Yeah.
And this is no longer we're giving up some early pressure but playing to come back in the game. This is you have not been providing that pressure and tempo to your team for a while. And if your team is not able to hold out in that situation, then you just have to drop. You don't keep holding for 4. It's not worth it. Just drop your 3. You can use this to try and disrupt the enemy team to an extreme extent. Like maybe you catch some players out, maybe put a ton of them on the back foot, maybe their medics on 1 life, and all of a sudden they're all scurrying and running back, and this can potentially allow you to dominate the closing minutes of the game with your pressure and kind of chip away at their lives, maybe get an advantage. There's a lot that you can pull off of it, so it might not be your ideal scenario, but don't wait out for 4 if your team is suffering. Like, just drop.
I have a story with 3
Really, in my
nukes.
opinion. Oh, go ahead.
Um, sorry, I didn't know if you were moving on. It sounded like you're going to 4 next. But
Not yet,
I have a story with 3 nukes because I want to sit here with my arms crossed and say I never drop 3, pretty much ever. Because I don't. I like you said, in competitive
Yeah.
play, I want my team to have the advantages and the tempo of that my nukes provide to get ahead. The only reason I ever really hold 3 is either if, one, the game has been filled with constant opportunities for me to keep getting points and keep getting refilled quickly, and like I've just never had much of a need to help my team out with it at all, then I'm okay basically holding my nukes just because it's too much of a waste of time and I can drop them later and still get the same benefit. The other reason would be like, um, well, I forgot the other reason. It's probably a bad reason.
Well, so like
Go ahead,
my
you
last
finish. Then I
point
want to tell my story.
on 3 stacks
You have so many points. I'm sorry. I want to
is
tell my story.
oh no, this is real quick, but in my opinion, 3 chains are typically an instrument of desperation. You'll mostly see them in situations where the commander is just looking for some sort of option in a difficult game,
Mm-hmm.
where they're like, "Oh, if I drop now, nothing's going to happen. Oh, if I drop now, nothing's going to happen. I
Yeah.
don't know how to get us back in the game. I don't know how to take control of the field." So they just kind of get to 3 stack and they're like, maybe this will be enough to do something. Like, this is a powerful tool. And it's okay to be in desperate situations sometimes. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's enough to swing the game. There's just not really a primary reason to 3 stack, right? It's just kind of like you either just get there, or you weren't able to make it to 4 and you're like, we need something now, or you just don't know what to do, which is okay to be at sometimes, but that's typically when you see a 3 chain.
That actually is perfect that you said that. That goes right well with my story. And it reminded me of my other point. The only other time I would really stack my nukes is, well, actually 2 reasons. Another one would be if I really need to get a huge point advantage. The way you do that on Commander is you leave the medic alive and you fight for a situation where you're farming off of the scouts and the other commander constantly and the ammo, and that they keep going back, getting full on lives and coming back out and farming for more points. If you want a really big score differential, usually stacking's a good way to go about that.
I have a different preferred way to make a big score differential, but
Okay.
I'll talk about that some other time. You can continue with your story.
Okay, here's the story. It must have been 2022, West Coast. We were playing some for fun games. It was me on Commander against Micro Commander, and my team took top and was demolishing his team pretty heavily. It seemed like we had the advantage for pretty much the entire game. I dropped 3 nukes, back one, few minutes, got the other, few minutes, got the other, and Micro hadn't dropped any. and I'm pretty sure we killed out their medic. And I was like, what is he doing? And I'd become overconfident, and no one on my team was talking about, hey, micro hasn't dropped yet, myself included. Suddenly, he drops 3 nukes, and I had 9 lives. And I just died out of the game, and they won. It was easily preventable. But the big benefit of 3 nukes, if you're going to do it, is that that's when you can catch people out.
Yep.
People throughout the game have to be keeping track of the enemy commander's nukes. If they aren't readjusting their standard for what safe nuking range is, which like in the first minute of the game, you can be at 6 lives. You shouldn't, but you're not going to get nuked out of the game on 6 lives. At the 10-minute mark, if the other team hasn't nuked, 12 lives isn't exactly safe. And that's a lot of lives.
Yeah. I have a similar story. This is from a members night though. It was a members night in Loveland. It was a randomizer game.
Mm-hmm.
We all know how those can go. And it was a really rough game. And as a commander, you don't really get excuses. As a commander, it's your job to adapt to the game, right? Your job to adapt to your team, to the situation. I was just looking for answers, right? Talking about it being an instrument of desperation. I was like, there's nothing. My scouts are not gaining any ground. My heavy cannot hold up. My heavy's not able to defend.
Mm-hmm.
My heavy's got no resources. If I drop right now, nothing's going to happen, right? There isn't one like big push the enemy team is trying to do here where I can stall time and fill up. My team is just on the back foot always.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to gain any ground out of it. And so what I did is I stacked my nukes, and some people on my team were not happy about it. I tell you what. And generally speaking, I probably would have been upset at myself, like watching it live. But they're even in hindsight, I'm like, there was not a better play at the time. So what I did was I held 3 nukes.
Mm-hmm.
My team was getting beat to crap. My medic got eliminated from the game. And what I did is I sat and I waited for both enemy 3 hits to pressure. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And they're pushing out and they're trading and they're taking like trades because they're like, we're going to elim them. We're pushing for the elim. We're pushing for the elim. We're pushing for the elim. And I wait until it seems like they're getting a little into like an iffy zone. I'm like, okay, they're overextending a lot. They really want this elim. And then I drop 3 nukes. Boom. Both 3 hits out of the game.
Nice.
So we didn't have a medic. Our heavy was really suffering. But now all of a sudden the enemy team had no 3 hits at all. And I think their commander either like had a nuke or was about to get a nuke. And it just was like this really significant pivotal moment where it was like just because of when it was dropped, it was able to flip the game. And that's 3 chains have a lot of potential to flip a game. That's where they sit, right? And that's why, I say like they're an instrument of desperation. That's not because they're a terrible thing. It's just because they're
the cost is so great to
deployed when you don't
them.
really have other options. Yeah, they aren't a goal. They're what happens when you just don't have options.
Mm-hmm.
But they can be powerful. The one thing I will say is to try to drop your 3 chain wisely, right? If the enemy team just went back for resupply and they're filling up, don't drop your nukes then. Drop your nukes drop your 3 chain when they're overextending. Drop their 3 chain like when it seems like you can pivot the game. You're like, this is where we have an opportunity to take advantage of this and just try desperately to bulldoze our way through the end of this game. That would be my one tip. Ideally, you aren't ever hoping to get here, but you will get here at some point. Like you'll end up 3 chaining at some point. It will happen.
Oh yeah. And it's good to be in those situations. Those are where you really learn how to play commander well, is in the really tough spots. And that was really good on you. Because you might have bought your team more time to live longer, but they still would have been in a losing situation had you been dropping your nukes one at a time. It would have just been like a slower defeat.
Yeah.
If you're trying to win and you're far behind, you need a big play, and that's what a three chain could do for you. It's just that the reason you don't ever
Yeah.
want to generally go for them is because of the cost. You have to spend the whole game
Well, it's
not
because
dropping your nukes, and that will really hurt your team.
yeah. Well, the reason you don't want to aim for them is because your objective should always be to win and to be in control of the game, right? Especially when you're going into a tournament, your strategy together with your team, it should be to play the game strongly. So planning for a 3-chain is kind of just planning for defeat. A 3-chain is specifically more of a back foot tool. And so you shouldn't be planning for it, but sometimes three chaining is an option that's there for you, right? It is something that can do a lot of things. It's a tool in your belt. It's just not. It shouldn't be your go-to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think some people out there would definitely disagree with this take, though. A lot of people.
Oh yeah,
and I think even I think it's more arena contextual than we're giving it credit for too.
yeah,
In bigger arenas, I think you can get away with stacking easier than in really tiny arenas.
yeah. And I'll talk about that a little bit. I'm about to talk about 4-chaining, if that's cool with you, and I'll talk a little bit about arena
Yeah.
dependency and how things change based on your environment and stuff
Just-
too later.
just-
But
For the listener, just so everyone knows why Aiden's got like an essay that they wrote out on how to nuke. I have some bulletin points, and so I'm just kind of along for the ride.
all right.
Let's
So
go. What do we got
dropping
next?
4. Dropping 4 is a common strategy usually developed by players in arenas with very defensive playstyles, and particularly large arenas where you can't reliably take lives off of the enemy medic. It's difficult to get a successful push off of the nuke due to the structure of the arena, so the enemy team can just backtrack your nuke very easily. This was kind of a very common strategy that was used in Sacramento and Laser Tag of Carmichael, because the main fallback resupply spot, Open Sign, had one path in and one path out. And so you get chained, you just backtrack that, and it's whatever. They drop single nukes, you just backtrack it, and it's whatever. It's not that big of a deal. And kind of all the spots. There was another spot, Boo Box, had one door, and so because of how useful and like how strong the backtracks were, it was just really hard to get significant pressure off of dropping one nuke. So a lot of people would drop 4. And so you'll see players keep up a consistent pressure throughout the game without nukes. Medic doesn't get eliminated. Your medic's able to stay alive. And then you 4-chain and you send an all-out attack in order to catch players out and eliminate them, force the resupply out of a defensible position, hopefully. You just kind of take control of the arena in order to close out the game. This is an end game strategy, and it's very do or die. It relies on your team being able to properly use the end game momentum to close it out. You kind of drop at 4 and force it to work. It's just kind of like, I have 4, we're at the end of the game, I'm dropping, we're going to try and close this out. There's not really any waiting at that point. You've already burnt through most of the game, and you'll need every second of the rest of the game at your disposal in order to hunt players. You're probably racing against the clock a little bit at that point. So it's like you just said, like big arenas, you'll see more stacking. Dropping 4 is kind of like for those kind of stalematey games. Like, there's not any like crazy development happening. Both the resupplies are pretty comfortable. And you really just need kind of like a big swing to try and like close the game out. That's where you'll see this.
Yeah. One advantage I can see to stacking 4 is, if nothing else, you get what 24 seconds of your game back that you didn't spend dropping individually
Yeah.
earlier, which I think I'd rather have the tempo, but like we should consider that.
Yeah.
I've seen people do that
Yeah.
where it's just like a battle all game long. One team drops 3, the other drops 4, and you just kind of see who rolled the better end of the deal at the end of the game.
Yeah. Don't die out of the game with 4 nukes.
I've seen it
If you're
happen.
stacking, you stay as healthy as possible, okay? Because I have seen people die out of the game with 80 special points, and that is going to be the most humiliating experience of your career. I'm sorry. That is, you will be ridiculed. Don't do that. That's very bad. That's pretty much all I have to say on 4 nukes. Really, it's pretty arena dependent, and it's pretty straightforward. I feel.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very brief spiel about 5 nukes. If you want to hear that real quick.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Don't chain 5 nukes. That's my spiel.
Unless you're trying to
it's
dunk on some noobs.
It is so unreliable. Most Nats finals games, you don't even get 5 nukes. Most Nats finals games, the commanders get 4 nukes. Chaining 5 is insanely unreliable, and once you have 4 nukes, you should be dropping. Oh, I got 4 nukes, drop. There is nothing that you acquire from dropping a 5 chain that you can't get from a 4 chain. If for some reason you get 5 nukes and the enemy medic is on 15 lives, like you did something on purpose.
That's what I was gonna say. This isn't
being a big dumb.
I would be really shocked. It would be straight up new territory for me if you were in an actual competitive game where you're trying and you got to 99 special points and you haven't dropped your nukes yet. Something went insanely right as far as you standing in the right spot and getting lots of ammo from your ammo and just farming up on points.
Yeah. And if you 5 chained, it's very possible that you stalled the game out long enough that you just won't be able to eel him. It's a lot of lives off of people, but like it's just very you're just spending a lot of time. Like if you average 2.5 minutes per nuke, which is like really fast. That's really difficult to pull off at the highest levels of play, to be honest. But like, if you average 2.5 minutes per nuke and you assume that the scouts filled up because they knew that you were stacking, now you have 2.5 minutes minus the time that it took you to nuke, which you got to drop and you have to run and get your bases or whatever, or get a reset. You have 2.5 minutes minus all of that time, which is a minimum of, or like a minimum expected time, right, of 35 seconds. Like you have to expect that you pull 7 seconds. So you assume that you have less than 2 minutes left to find both scouts and take 15 lives off of both of them, which is doable, but still very difficult. And again, that's like assuming a very fast rate of acquiring your nukes, and is almost definitely not possible at the highest level of play.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep, pretty much it happens when a player is at a huge advantage and they decide, I'm going to try to 5 chain this game. And that's kind of like a goal. But I really only see it happen when one team is just completely outmatching the other.
And don't do it. Like it's really mean, and it's very demoralizing.
Disrespectful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very disrespectful. Like if you're doing this, it's against weaker players, and they're valuable players in the community. We're happy that they're there.
Yep.
And as it is, like you're already showing how good you are. You're already like stomping the game. Dropping a 5 chain is just mean, and all it does is boost your ego a little bit. And if you like can sit there and say to yourself, yeah, I'd rather boost my ego and make all those players sad to be here That's really mean. That's really sad. I have never five chained in my life. I've had some like very insane commander games. I've had some very, very one sided commander games on my side, and I have never once five chained in my life. And not to say that I'm better than anyone else, but um, I just don't see a point. All of my crazy commander games, I elim the enemy team in 5 minutes. That's how it goes. If you're outclassing them that much, just prove it by winning the game faster. I have some like 3-minute elims. Like, I probably could have kept the medic alive and farmed up 5 nukes if I wanted to. Why would you do that? Like, that just doesn't seem fun to me. Like, I don't know. And it doesn't even, like, when somebody 5-stacks, the last thing I'm thinking is how good they are as a player, right? I'm like, wow, what an idiot. I don't want that player on my team for nats. Like, if they care more about their ego than performing to the best of their ability every chance that they get, I don't want them on a nats team.
Well, I don't want to go down this whole rabbit hole, but I can kind of understand coming into the scene as a 19-year-old. Like, I
Right.
think someone penta-nuked my B team, and everyone was like patting that guy on the back, giving applause. It was like a trophy in a way. Like, if you can penta-nuke someone, it shows that you are a totally dominant force, and people respect that about you. You don't respect that, but other people definitely respect the penta-nuke.
That is true.
And for a while, absolutely, I've had the desire to have my own penta-nuke, and I've tried to get it. I'm not sure if I've actually done it. Just getting 5 nukes in general is kind of hard. But yeah, you know, people can make their own choices, but I'll stand with Odin's Fist here. Like, we already have a problem trying to keep new players in the community, and the way you keep people in the community is, 1, you show them that they're valued, and 2, you give them chances to win. Not go easy on them, but if a player comes in and they basically just lose games over and over and over again, or if they, especially when you have to go against a really high caliber team and you're a really low caliber team, they already know they're going to lose. So dunking on them like that is a great way to basically tell them, like, you suck. That's pretty much what you're communicating. I didn't respect you enough to play my best against you. I just held all my nukes because I knew I could do this to you.
There is one way that I have seen the 5-stack be deployed. I'm not going to name names here. I might later when we talk, just us, but not to throw anybody out into the cosmic abyss of the internet. Where they came into a brand new field and they're playing practice games before nats, which you have a limited time and a limited number of matches to do so. And in the practice game, they were playing against a weak team. And in order to spend as much time in the field learning the angles as possible, they focused on trading and playing the game and didn't drop any nukes in order to learn the field more.
Yeah.
And then it ended in them dropping at the end of the game, which was a 5 chain. And I am less judgmental of that.
Yeah.
Like, they had an objective in mind that was about like growth and development.
Totally.
It wasn't about showboating and ego. 5 chaining is still rude. It's still mean. But I fully believe that player would have done the same thing with 4 nukes. I think 5 just happened because of the skill discrepancy.
Definitely.
It still sucks.
Let's move
try
on.
to 5 chain. Yeah. That's my 5 chain spiel.
I love it.
It's not a tactical maneuver. Don't do it.
It's a moral discussion more than anything. You're never going to really be in a situation where you're thinking about if I should 5 chain or not, unless you were trying to get there.
Yeah. So, you know, kind of moving on from that, we talked about why to nuke. We talked about stacking. Something that is kind of important when you're talking about laser tag is the environmental conditions. Because there's a lot of variables in how you should approach the game. And so my general approach when I'm thinking about the game is looking at it from a structured team environment.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have a team for nats, you're having your team meetings, you're having strategy discussions, you're making sure you're on the same page, and you're approaching the game together as a whole unit. But there's a lot of times where you'll play laser tag where that's not the case. And I actually think that this causes a lot of issues for players who try to jump into tournaments. Is that members night is a completely different environment than tournaments are.
Mm-hmm.
And so you develop a lot of habits and tendencies in members nights that don't work so well in tournaments. And I think a common example of that is stacking, right? So talking about 3 chains and talking about it kind of being a tool of desperation, when you're consistently feeling like you don't have control of the game because you have randomized teams repeatedly, it's very easy for commanders to get in the habit of 3 chaining because it's a consistent way to have that specific impact on the game, right? If you keep tempo up, sometimes your team doesn't know what to do with it. Sometimes your team is just losing anyways. 3 chains, it's always, okay, well, if you survive until you 3 chain, you drop 3 and it's kind of like this big boom. And so for one thing, I would like to say not to approach tournaments, specifically Nats, with the same mindset that you come to members nights with, and to maybe reevaluate your strategies.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I want to talk a bit about how different things are more or less effective in different environments. And kind of the main things here are going to be the type of tournament you're playing, the team that you have, and the arena.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about the arena and how like arena structure can affect the validity of chaining. If the arena is more defensive, it's more of a stalemate and not a lot of development is happening, it's okay to stack nukes in order to make a bigger play. I personally have some feelings about some arenas that people think are stacking arenas where I disagree. But that's a matter of opinion or preference.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find a way to make plays consistently off of single nukes, I think that that's generally the better play. But stacking is something that you can use to help close out a game in a situation where you feel like you can't make a lot of development off of dropping nukes one by one. Definitely in more fast-paced arenas and more hectic arenas, things like the St. George Lasermania arena, dropping one by one you're going to see a lot more value from it.
Yeah.
Because you drop a nuke and it's very easy to just push people around the arena for a period of time. And I think it's easy to go into an arena and not see that same level of value and say, oh, well, I'll just stack because the individual nukes aren't working here. But I think that you can still get a lot of value out of them, even if it's not as punishing as things like Lasermania.
Yeah, I think it's just harder in a big arena to set your team up to be in position to capitalize on your nukes. Because in a small arena, there's like nowhere to go anyway. You nuke, and in an arena like that, your team can be covering every viable fallback area of like the St. George arena, leading to tons of resets.
Yeah.
But in like the Detroit arena, you push them out, and maybe you have a scout position in their number 1 fallback area. Scout gets some resets. They go to fallback area number 2. No one's there because the arena's massive.
It is massive.
You just don't see those like game-ending reset chains as often in an arena like that.
Yeah. Especially like in large arenas like in Detroit or in Brisbane, you just need bodies in the field, right? You can't have everyone on your team dedicated to covering all the fallback spots.
Mm-hmm.
You still need people in the field leading up to it. So that's where you see the chains. Different tournaments require different levels of play. I think in a Nats, dropping nukes one at a time is just the best way to play the game. And if you aren't getting enough off of the nukes, that's a discussion to have with your team. I think there's almost always a situation, or I think there's almost always a way to figure out how to get value out of the nukes. Maybe chaining is working for you, and that's something to discuss with your team. Like you said before, commander is actually a very selfless position, you need to know what your team wants from the nukes. So talk with them, discuss it, figure it out. In other tournaments, in more casual tournaments, there's different formats. So like random draw, for example. You know, there's different types of random draw, but you probably have a bunch of people on your team that you don't play with usually, and you're going to be swapping positions a lot. And so kind of an easy way to see how your team plays is to watch other people play commander on the team. And if you kind of match your nuking pattern to that, it's a really easy way for them to know what to do. Obviously, it might not be the most ideal, but when you nuke, you want your team to know what to do off of it. And so if you notice that like two of your teammates just always dropped like at 2, it might seem weird to you, but when they're your scouts, if you just drop at 2, they're way more likely to have some gameplay in mind that will benefit the team than if you drop 1 right off the bat, if you do a rush nuke, or if you drop 3. They might not necessarily have a game plan formed in mind where they're like, oh, I know what to do right now. And playing to your team and enabling your team is really the biggest benefit of the nukes. So while we talk about the ideal way to use them, really the ideal way to use them is however your team can use them most effectively. And so you want to pay a lot of attention to your team.
Nice. What's your next point?
Do you have anything? So my next thing is going to be members nights. Because I'll say that there's like generally 3 types of players. There's a lot more out there, obviously, but I'll say that there are like the hyper competitive top tier Nats players. There are developing Nats players who are like, they're trying to go to tournaments and get better and perform in tournaments. And then there are definitely players who just like members nights and more casual play. And I think that's perfectly fine. And I think maybe they also want to strategize and stuff, but they just prefer members nights. So I got a little bit for you guys. I love all my tag homies. Okay. For members nights, you have a more consistent player base, right? You're playing with a lot more people that you know. And so what happens is you kind of form habits and routines where like there's just kind of a way that people play your arena. Kind of an example of this, when we went to New Zealand this year for Nats, it was a Nats. You have to change your playstyle for Nats. You have to adjust it. And they did. But kind of all the New Zealand players kind of had a default playstyle for their arena that they developed over years, right? You like claim specific key territory, you defend it, and then a lot of them stacked and chained. And so there's nothing wrong, especially as you're learning, to kind of follow examples of other people from your site and drop your nukes like they do. But when you really are like trying to like prove yourself and climb those ranks in members nights and like flip games against players that are perceived to be better than you, use your nukes unpredictably. There's a lot of times where you can just totally throw people off. If everyone's just 3 chaining in your arena and you like go and you get a really quick nuke and you just drop, you could maybe get an insane push off of that. Or maybe your arena, everyone loves to get that fast nuke. They love to just drop right away. If you just go and you focus on just like really creating like a solid defense, and you just set up at the start of the game and you get filled up and you get topped up and you weather out that, you ride out that storm, and you come out on top and you haven't dropped yet, and you got a nuke and a half in the bank, and you're building your way up, and you like just kind of hold up, and then you drop a 2 chain or a 3 chain or whatever, you could totally throw them off. You could flip the game because they just aren't used to it.
Yeah, agreed.
So like having kind of unpredictable strategies and that flexibility with your nuking where you can do things that people aren't expecting, that's where you like catch players out, or you can like totally take control of the momentum of the game. So
Yeah, definitely.
that's my tip for my members night homies.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say you should try to play members nights like a tournament to prep for tournaments. But the reality is there's going to be a lot less structure in members nights. So you want to collect whatever coordination from your team you can. A lot of times I'll go directly to the heavy and hope the scouts maybe follow up somehow, but I'll pretty much communicate with my heavy because that's the most powerful impact I can do with the least amount of effort. But in a tournament setting, obviously you want the whole team to know generally when you're going to nuke, how you're going to communicate that, what they should do to follow up to make the biggest impact.
Yeah. And I don't know if I said this, but on the coordinating with your team, it's really good to give them a 60-second warning.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really want to drop a nuke when you get it, you could like say like, oh, I'm going to drop in 60 seconds while you're like 2 special points off or 3 special points off. And then be like, okay, well, now I got to go get 3 special points really fast.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, 60 seconds still gives you, 20 seconds per special point to get that. If you need to, which can still be some time. But that 60-second warning just gives your team time. Your team doesn't need 60 seconds to get into position, but what they need is, oh, I'm at 12 lives. I'm going to go get a round of lives real quick. Oh, I'm at 5 shots. I can't do anything off that nuke with 5 shots, so they can go get refilled. If you just say, I'm dropping now, go, you don't necessarily know what your scout is at. You don't necessarily know what your heavy's at. And so getting them the opportunity to think 2 steps ahead, right? Put themselves in a good position to be in a good position when you need them to be.
Yeah.
I think is very helpful. And I think a lot of people, when they play the game and they start thinking tactically on an individual level, they expect everyone to kind of be in their head, be in the same mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll be like, oh, well, I told my team I was dropping. Why didn't they get anything off of it? Well, your team has a lot of their own stuff going on. They have their own game that they're playing, so you have to be considerate of that and understand that like they want to help you, but they need the ability to do so. And so giving them more warning just gives them more time to set up for it.
All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of that naturalistic or organic approach to nuking that I mentioned. So a lot of these situations we've talked about come down to sort of what you see in front of you. We've noted some things that are like good reasons to nuke, things that will generally help your team create the most bang for your buck out of things. So I just wanted to say that I never start off a game with a plan for when I'm going to nuke. Sometimes you do an early nuke rush strategy by going for your bases first. And that's totally cool. But what I'm really doing if I ever do that is I'm planning to start the game with 10 special points. Because beyond that, I don't really know what's going to happen. Like it's possible that I go in and I get shut out and I get to 18 special points and I get low on lives. And it's really important that I go back. Or maybe like my team really just needs some extra help on the defense. And the whole plan fell apart. If I stick rigidly to I'm early nuking, I'm probably going to miss out on a much better opportunity to nuke for something else. For example, if my team is reeling, if things are just going bad, maybe it's better that I hold on to that nuke and use it to pause the game or to punish someone who overextends that I notice later. I mean, having a nuke, while we recommend that new players use them right away for the inherent benefit of it, at a more advanced level, when I get a nuke, all that changes for me is I know that I have a nuke now that I can use any moment I want, and I'm looking for good opportunities. Usually, I decide those opportunities based on my momentum. If I'm attacking and I'm getting like a 2-to-1 hit ratio, I'm tagging somebody every 4 to 5 seconds. I'm accumulating special points pretty quickly. I'm not about to leave that situation without a good reason. Like leaving a good spot to go nuke, it doesn't guarantee that I'll ever get that opportunity back. And maybe I'll come back to a situation where I'm only tagging someone once every 10 seconds and I'm slowly accumulating points. So a lot of times, one of the biggest reasons I nuke is simply because it's the best option at my disposal. Like if I slow down, if my tempo slows down, if I find a lull in the action and I want to keep like my impact on the game up, I might go get a bunch of resets on people, find that opportunity, just nuke, go get resupplied. Like I'm filling every second of my time with something useful for my team. And a lot of times nuke can be just that filler. Even though they're the most important thing in the game, I use them kind of nonchalantly almost. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that philosophy.
Hmm.
Not always. I don't always use them nonchalantly, but if things are going well, I use them nonchalantly.
I think everything kind of comes together, and this is like where you get like good commander players, because if everything was just like a chart and you're like, what's the best solution to this answer, and you just like I think there would be a cap, like maybe a soft cap on commander skill level, but there really isn't. And so that intuition kind of plays a significant role in it.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, in competitive play, you should have a general plan, but that plan generally is as simple as, when I get a nuke, I'm going to tell the team and go back and get resupply and swap out with the heavy, and I will drop my nuke. My team will do work, and I will get a resupply. I think that's generally like the best approach. You'll see a lot of the top tier teams do it. Brisbane does this all the time. They come back nuke and then get resupplied because of, again, you can't be in the best spot to nuke generally as a commander, or be in the best spot off of the nuke. There are definitely plenty of reasons to not do that, but I think that it's good to be like, this is how I plan to drop my nukes. And then if better opportunities come along, then you can take those. But if they don't, your team at least knows that they're going to have this like consistent like circumstance where like you can't know what's going on with every player on your team. You can't know what's going on across the field. And so you don't know if certain players are struggling or certain players see golden opportunities. So having this reliable, like, okay, the team knows that when I get my nukes, I will come back and drop them unless something better happens. That then they at least have something reliable to depend on, and you're a dependable player.
I think that's
that
a good caveat. Just like, unless something better happens. And it's so hard to know in the moment. I really think nonchalant is not the right word I would actually use here. I just opportunistically using them.
Yeah. And I think being opportunistic and using your intuition are very important. And I think to play off of that and talking a bit about like the rush nuke strategy, I think rush nuking is something you can definitely do and get a lot of value out of. But a lot of times, if you wait 5 seconds, you'll get a better opportunity. Like if you're rushing your nuke, still look at the field. Like look at what's going on. If you're like, okay, I have my fast nuke, and you drop, and all of a sudden the enemy heavy just goes and puts your heavy down, and the enemy team like just pushed out and took a bunch of the field because you weren't active in the field because you were focusing on rushing a nuke. All of a sudden your rush nuke doesn't really do anything, and you're like, oh, that sucks.
Right. Honestly, maybe here's a good template people can use. When you're playing Commander, at any given moment, it's like, okay, once you have a nuke, it's like, I can nuke or blank. And always be comparing your nuke to whatever that other best option looks like. Because if that next option is, hey, the enemy backline is exposed and I'm nearby, versus taking time to move away and drop a nuke, I would choose attack the enemy backline. I mean, you could get a ton of value out of that and still have your nuke later, which will still maintain its value. But the opportunity to attack the backline while it's open may not come again. You always want to be comparing the nuke to what you have.
Absolutely. But, going back to the don't be hesitant to drop, right? Like you still get a lot of value out. If you aren't like working the enemy team without it, play around the nuke. It's a tool for you to use.
Yeah,
At the end of the
definitely.
line, it's like the key tool in your arsenal, and you want to get value out of it, right? And so if using that tool would make the game go better, deploy it.
Hmm.
And if it's kind of something where it's like not going to do a whole lot for you right then it's okay to hold on to it.
Yeah, if I had to rate the choice of using a nuke on a scale of like 1 to 10, I'd say it pretty much always falls into like that 7 to 9 out of 10 in terms of how good of a choice it was. The 7 to 10 out of
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
So it's a good choice, hard to beat. And you should use them.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Hey, I want to wrap this up soon. Hey, Odin, I want to hit you with a couple hot topic questions about nuking.
Yep.
I've seen this trend starting to come up. This disrespectful strategy. You're 1v1ing somebody. You tag them down. You drop your nuke right in front of their face as soon as they're down because you know that the longest nuke time for you is still going to be shorter than their time before they're going to come back up. What do you think of that?
Okay. Um, I, I I like this specifically. Uh, when okay, I like this when it's safe. And so the best situation for this, and kind of the one situation where I will do, is if you push into the enemy resupply, you put the heavy down, you had put everyone down, and you have a reset on the heavy. And that is the most important thing because while the longest nuke time is 7 seconds, you still have to hold the special button down. And when it comes to laser tag, there's this thing called equipment. And the funny thing about equipment is that it doesn't always do the exact thing you want it to. And
I
sometimes
know.
that nuke press takes like a solid 2 seconds of holding that button down. And you do not want to be on top of an enemy heavy without a reset when that is happening. But if you put the heavy down and you have a reset and you drop and the heavy decides, I'm going to wait here and tag you when I come up, missile him right in the butt. I missiled a heavy while nuking in a tournament before, and it was really funny for me. It was not so funny for him.
Oh, that was probably the most embarrassing moment of their career.
It was, but the big thing is that it was very useful. I had already tagged the heavy down, and then I missiled him, and then the nuke went off. That's 6 lives. And that whole time, instead of flushing and regrouping with the team, he was sitting there trying to cancel the nuke. So, huge win. I think it's okay to nuke on top of people, but make sure you have a reset. And make sure you're healthy when you do it. Because, like, the saddest thing is when you're like, haha, I'm going to nuke in the middle of the enemy resupply, and a scout comes back for resupply, and it's like, oh, there's a commander here nuking. And tags you down because you just brawled with everyone. And also that person that is down has to be the heavy. Like, don't do that because you shot the enemy commander down and you're trying to showboat. Because it's like the scariest thing when you're dropping a nuke is the enemy heavy knowing where you are. And if the heavy's not the one dead and the commander goes, Luke's dropping a nuke right in front of me. And your heavy goes, oh, that's really funny. And runs over and tags Luke down.
Oh, cool story, bro.
That's going to change the game a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts on that. I think it is okay in the right situation and possibly even a good thing, right? Because now you are in the most ideal spot to be when the nuke goes off. You just flush the enemy resupply. You're right where they want to get back to. And out in the field. But, it's a risk reward thing. And I'm all for taking calculated risks. But, I'm all about playing as reliably as possible. And so it's kind of one of those things where you have to wait for yourself. Like, is there a reason for me to drop this nuke right now? the enemy heavy's dead. I have the reset. How safe do I feel dropping it right here? And it's kind of a personal decision. Like you have to kind of weigh the field and the situation and see how it feels for you.
All right. Second and last question. You hear the enemy nuke going off. You, with your fully functional equipment and quick reflexes, hit your nuke, hoping to get a shorter timer than them and to cancel it. Thoughts?
My thought is no. I won't do this. I think it's a lot easier to prep for the enemy nuke, recover, and then launch another nuke if you need to. Kind of like the mushrooms in Mario Kart, right? Like if you're getting red shelled, you can kind of like get hit by the red shell and then use your mushroom to kind of
instantly put you back where you were.
You're recovering.
Yeah. That's a good metaphor.
My preference is and I said it kind of earlier in the discussion. My preference is to kind of do this if I know that the enemy commander is trying to nuke in order to kind of like push it off, and you'll get some nuke on nuke cancels from that, which is phenomenal. But worst case scenario, you are launching preemptively. You are the one biding time. You're the one setting your team up to fill up and be in a good spot by the time they drop. So the better thing is to just pay attention to the field and try and understand where the commander's at, which I have a lot to talk about watching the enemy commander as a commander. Hopefully we'll do the commander tips video soon, and I can talk a lot about it there because I have some rants. But I do think that paying attention to the enemy commander is very important. But that's where I would do that is kind of preemptively if you know that they're trying to nuke. I think doing it reactively is really awkward. There's really only one nuke that you can pull that is effective for that, which is the 3.9 second nuke line. Because anything whenever you're playing around with being in the middle, you're you still have to hold that special button down. You still have to react. You have your reaction speed time to take into account, plus holding the special button down. It's really unreliable. And then if you pull a 7 second, that's bad. And, again, this is assuming that they pull a 7, which having to register that they pull a 7 on top of just reacting to the nuke pulling in general is you're adding time to your reaction time. And if they pull something smaller and you're trying to pull a cheeky nuke to nuke on nuke cancel, then chances are you're just getting wrecked. So I would say not to react to the enemy nuke, but to try and be preemptive about it is good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wish if anybody has the actual probabilities of getting the different timers or has more information about that, you should put that in the comment section because that would help me know what I'm talking about a little more with this. But I think in general, it's the probability of you succeeding at this and having your equipment go quick enough to even buy you that extra second of time. I think it's really low, and the risk is that you lost a whole nuke for nothing. So I don't recommend it either, but it has happened. It's happened once or twice, and it feels pretty good when it works.
Yeah, I think kind of the bigger instance I would say that's more relevant is if you were already holding your nuke button down and you hear the enemy nuke go off, you're already trying to.
Right. Well, you can't really control that.
And I say just stick it. I say just. Well, I think sometimes you can take your finger off real quick and you can be
try to bail out.
But there's just
I don't know. I'd probably I'd pull it off if I could, just because that they got a second head start on you.
Well, okay. I think it depends. I think if you're actively about to push, do it. I think a lot of times people like hold it down. They're like, oh no, a nuke, and they pull off. But like most of the time, the you've already held it down long enough where the nuke is going to go off anyways. I've seen a lot of people be like, no, I pulled the finger off, but it's still going. And so I think like mentally committing to it is going to put you in a better mindset, I guess, if you're already there. If you can, if you're like, oh, I was just about to do it, then don't. Just, okay, they got this one off first. They were faster on the draw. But, you know, nuke on nuke cancels happen. They suck when it happens to you. And they're awesome when it happens to the other team. It's the awkward thing about it is a lot of times it's really hard to tell until it goes off. And a lot of times you don't want to go out prepping for your nuke to go off when there's a risk that theirs is the one that will go off. And so a lot of times you're in this awkward like limbo state until it happens. So really like a nuke on nuke cancel is kind of like a big deal. It really is. But it's not as impactful as like an intentional nuke cancel. Like your heavy pushed in and canceled their nuke. In a situation where their team was pushing out. Their team was getting ready for a nuke. They were expecting it. And all of a sudden their nuke is canceled. And they're now in this awkward, vulnerable position without a nuke. That's a much bigger deal, I think. So like nuke on nukes are really awkward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's something to like really aim for, but they happen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are a couple cheesy strats I wanted to throw out there, but yeah. All right. I think we're going to wrap it up there. That is 1/10 of what we in total have to say about nuke theory and some commander theory wrapped up in there. We'll definitely do the 10 commander tips next, and some of that will be nuke related, some of it will not be nuke related.
Yeah. Yep. It'll be good. Look forward to it.
Is there one thing you want players to take away from this discussion?
Think about the game. That's kind of like the big thing. And if you're going to a tournament, talk with your team and plan things out. Like obviously you can't plan exactly, oh, this is what's going to happen at this time, but just come up with a game plan, come up with a strategy, be on the same page as much as possible.
Definitely. I'll just second that. You know, nukes are contextual with the game. So there's no one size fits all. But if I had to give a one size fits all answer, it's drop your nukes soon as you get them.
Yep.
All right.
You're a new player. Drop your nuke as soon as you get them.
That's all for now. I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. Cancel!
Yeah.
Right.
Don't nuke in front of the enemy heavy while they're on.
Oh, that's good advice. All right, bye.